Now it's time to talk about the leaders in Jamestown. And the first that comes to mind, of course, is Captain John Smith. Now, the history of John Smith is he was an Englishman. At the age of 7 and 12, he was enrolled in different grammar schools. And at the age of 16, he was apprenticed, and his father died around that same period. So shortly after that, John Smith had a desire to go fight wars. So he quit his apprenticeship, and he went and joined up with a group in France. But that war was short-lived, so he returned back to England. It was shipwrecked, actually, on the shores of... You'll know where this is. There's an island where the Viking raid first happened. It's on the English shores. That same...
Isle of Man?
Nope, but... history details. Anyway, the idea, the importance of it is that he learned how to study swordsmanship and horsemanship. And that got him ready to go fight the wars that were happening over in Turkey area with the Turks and the Muslims.
In defense of Jerusalem.
Right.
Recapturing Jerusalem was the idea behind those battles.
Right. So,
We're connected to devices.
hey, there we go, we're back. So John Smith became a captain in the cavalry and fought the wars in Transylvania, specifically, where he was eventually put up into individual duel combat, jousting, right? All the fun stuff from the
Medieval time period,
medieval era, right? And he won by decapitating 3 Turks. And he was awarded his own, it's called a coat of arms. And it had a motto on it that he lived by the rest of his life. To live is to conquer. And that would be a motivating impetus for him as he continued. He was captured at another battle, left for dead on the field. He was captured, sold into slavery. He
survived on the entrails of horses.
Horses. And he made it to Russia as a slave before he was able to overpower his captor and flee across Europe. Fought a couple wars in Africa before returning to England. And then at that point, the English colonial
Jamestown.
endeavors were underway. Right, so he joins up and sails to Jamestown. And so he was one of the few men who had fought on 3 continents already and would fight on a 4th, the North American continent.
Yeah, and so all of those kind of activities made him prepared for the adventures that would take place in Jamestown and sail into Virginia. And so when the battles were dying off and there wasn't a need for fighting anymore in the east, so he was ready to head west and see what challenges lied ahead of him there. Yeah, and so he was brought on board by the London Company to sail with them to Jamestown. And so Jamestown was also one of the first aspects of self-government or appointed government that we see in America, where people were invested with the power to govern themselves by the crown. So the London Company was the one that set off that charter and gave the commission to the leaders. Now, they didn't tell the leaders who was going to be in command of Jamestown, which caused a lot of problems on the ship getting over there. They took all the names and they put them in a locked box, and they didn't know until they got to Virginia and opened the box who was actually going to be the leader of the president of the colony and who was going to be on the council.
I just think that's hilarious.
There was a lot of infighting and skirmishing, and John Smith actually got put in jail on the ship because of a skirmish that broke out there because there was disagreements on how things should happen. When John Smith arrived in Virginia, he was in chains in the ship hold. And then, of course, when the names were open, John Smith was on the council. He was one of those 6 members who was going to be on the council. And then we were able to, he was one of those leaders. So John Smith's leadership qualities were forged on those other continents and really helped serve the people in Jamestown very well. Now, there was also a lot of controversy surrounding him because a lot of people didn't like his no-nonsense leadership. So a lot of people did not appreciate the way he interacted with the natives. Was he respected them. He totally respected them and feared them, and they in turn feared him. Unlike Radcliffe would be an example of a weak leader. He sought to be this overbearing, benevolent, gift-giving, let the Indians have anything they wanted or asked for. And John Smith said that is foolishness. We don't have the supplies to do that, for one, and two, it just shows us as weak that we can't defend ourselves. So Radcliffe, his example of leadership ended sadly in his termination. He was captured. He was killed by the Indians and filleted alive and burned at the stake. Awful ending to him, but that is the consequences of poor leadership qualities. Whereas John Smith, on the other hand, when he went on an exploration mission, he was surrounded by, he claims, 200 other natives, and then he defended them off with a human shield.
He had an interpreter with him that he secured by the arm that they wouldn't harm him through this other guy.
Yeah, and it wasn't until he got stuck in the mud that he ended up having to surrender. And then they took him to the village, showed him off to everybody else.
One of the providences of God was that he was struck with arrows many times through his clothing, but never pierced his body.
Yeah, and so then he was taken off and showed around to all the other villages as this great capture. But then when he got to Powhatan's summary judgment on him was we should execute him. He will be executed. And Pocahontas, his daughter, intervenes and throws herself upon him when he is about to be chopped by the hatchet. And she
Club Mall.
Pocahontas, not Powhatan. Powhatan's daughter, Pocahontas, intervened and saved John Smith's life in that instance. So that's an example of how good leadership can have a positive impact. His other thing he said, if you turn over here so we can see the garden, he said, if you will not work, you will not eat.
Right, and so segueing into that, this is perfect that we're right in front of the gardens here. We have, in our culture today, we have quite a bit of emphasis on individualism. So if you're, you've probably heard the term snowflake generation. If you're even late term millennial, lots of individualism. Parents don't teach their children to obey them anymore. It's sort of just a laughing idea that children would obey parents, and so lots of individualism. And that's exactly what they had in Jamestown. And when they didn't like John Smith telling them to work. I mean, who wants to garden? It's sunny, it's hot, so it's kind of comical they have these gardens out there. So they got rid of John Smith. They wanted to just get rich quick and trade with the Indians and have the Indians give them all their food, and the Indians were like, nope, not going to work that way. So they got rid of John Smith and all his instructions to work, and his general instructions, safety instructions too, on dealing with the Indians. And they went through a really terrible starving time. Things like they had a whole island of pigs, and they decided that instead of going and harvesting those pigs, they were gonna stick it out in the fort, and the Indians were gonna, make that hard to harvest the pigs. They had all sorts of reasons, and the Indians ended up harvesting all the pigs.
That proverb that says, "There's a lion in the street, so I won't get up or work."
Right. So they refused to obey, and just skirmishes, or there'd be all these incidents where one guy would die at the hands of the Indians and the rest would survive. And if you look into the details, it's always because they thought they knew better and didn't want to follow directions. So it's just a general warning to us that individualism, in the sense of refusing to obey authority. Over and look.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, we're back. Okay. Well, we don't know how much got lost. I'll look while you finish.
We'll pause for a second.
Yeah. Let's see.
Go ahead and finish it, yeah.